You're listening to Discography Discussion, episode 254, Machine Head. Hosted by Dan Terry.
I bought the holy fucking shit edition of this.
And Joseph Wren.
Excuse me, sir. I'm the genre police.
Presented by discussmetal.com. And if you're followed around by a therapist swinging a 10-ton hammer, then you are ready for this episode of Discography Discussion. I am Joe. That is Dan. Happy New Year, everybody. We're talking about Machine Head.
It's 2022. We made it. We survived. I mean, kind of. I've only got one leg. Nobody knows where Jeff is.
Hey, y'all.
I mean, it's just kind of one of those things. But, we hope that this show is something that you can count on. That, no matter what, hell or high water, we're going to have an episode out every week. Well, maybe during hell. I don't know about high water. I mean, if there's a flood, I'm gonna probably push the show back.
Just because the recording date gets pushed back doesn't mean the release date gets compromised.
1,000%. I'm about to go, to Florida for a week, and you guys aren't even gonna know. You're not gonna know.
They know now, Dan.
They're gonna know. Well, if you're down there at a certain very popular attraction, let me know, because I'll be there. And I decided there was no better way to start off 2022 than to talk about Machine Head, a band that, again, everybody's like, yeah, I was looking through your episodes and I can't seem to find the Machine Head episode. And I'm like, yeah, it's because we haven't done it yet. And they're like, what is wrong with you? I'm like, a lot of things. Where would you like for me to begin?
Machine Head is one of those heavy metal bands that has gone through the changes we all know and love. It started off with that Pantera vibe. Little bit of groove metal, a little bit of thrash. They tried the new metal thing. You know what? It worked better than it should have. But I'm glad in 2022, Machine Head is a heavy metal band that, for better or for worse, just captures the vibe I expect when listening to this genre. I like the fact that the music sounds like it's being played by human beings. The guitars have the stock effects that they use for the intro and the outro that were heavily influenced by 80s thrash, and they don't really let up on those tricks. It sounds like music that you could play and record and write, not in that order, yourself.
I mean, I couldn't. I don't know how to play the guitar or the drums. I mean, I can kind of play the guitar, but not like these guys can. I would have a hard time making these albums. And I think Machine Head had a hard time making these albums. From what I can tell, with the amount of members that have been in this band, it's not like, Zayo levels of different members, but you've got a band with a charismatic lead singer who basically is the band, something that we are familiar with on this show, bands that are led by one person. When you think of Machine Head, you think of Robb Flynn. He's just the guy who's always going to have a new Machine Head album out, and he's not going to let you down unless you hate nu metal, but even then, he will let you down a couple of times. He didn't let me down.
I feel like Robb Flynn is one of those lead vocalists / guitarists that has been there for me the whole time. It's like a Slayer vibe. Kerry King's always going to be there. He's always going to be shredding, and it's going to be great. Robb Flynn just has the vocals in the pocket, so he has more tools in the tool chest.
He definitely has a lot of things in his reserve that I was not prepared for in certain situations, most notably the last album, which we will talk about later. But yeah, I mean, Machine Head is one of, I think, the most prolific metal bands from the 90s that has continued on through today, and has gone through the modernization process pretty well, to the point where they eventually start to do the throwback thing, which is kind of interesting, because we've got like a lot of new metal bands that are popping out of the woodwork nowadays that are doing the throwback thing. Even Limp Bizkit's doing the throwback thing. But Machine Head, I mean, they lived through all of that. They evolved away from that, and then they kind of went back into that. So it's a little interesting, to say the least.
Well, before Dan asks for another dueling guitar solo, I'm going to take this time to say thank you to everyone for listening to the podcast. Thank you for listening and for subscribing. If you are not a subscriber, then you can find everything Discography Discussion at discussmetal.com. We are on Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, iHeartRadio. So if you have an Amazon Echo or a Google Home, you have no excuse. Ask it to play the latest episode of the Discography Discussion podcast, and it will. We're also on Facebook and on Twitter at discussmetal. Be sure to like, favorite, and subscribe. It really helps us out. It lets us know you're listening. And now Dan is going to tell us all about 5-star reviews.
We do enjoy our 5-star reviews here on Discography Discussion. And apparently, as of the recording of this episode, Spotify is going to start letting you guys leave reviews for podcasts. I don't know if they're written reviews. I don't know a whole lot about it other than that, but there will be some sort of rating system put in place. So if you want to get in on that Spotify rating action, make sure to do that. And keep sharing the episodes, guys. And the most important thing we've got going on here in 2022 is sponsorship. If you are in a band and you want us to give your band a shout out or a recommendation of some type and you'd like to sponsor one of our episodes, send us an email at danandjoeshow@gmail.com and we will talk about how we can help you. Help us help you. Speaking of people that help us, I would like to take this moment to talk about our wonderful patrons. And by talk about them, I mean I'm just gonna say their names and give them shout outs because they are like basically our shareholders at this point. And that is Evan Merkel, welcome to the fold. Lost Fiction, Kyle Driver, Timu Rantilia.
Well done.
Dangerous Dave, Ryan Rowe, Richard Renz, Big T, Brandon Miranda, Ken Zapla, Tantalized Funyuns,
Best name ever.
Jeremy Prince, Josh Moser, David Brown, Samuel Woodward, Brian the Dean, It's Me, Brave, Lance Allagood,
The King of Metal,
Alexander, Patrick Asplund, and Jeffrey De Los Santos.
the actual Mac.
Thank you guys so much for your contributions to our podcast. We love hanging out with you guys every month. Let's keep them going. Over on Twitter, we got a comment from Nightpain69420. Nice. Funny y'all should mention Mushroom Head in relation to Cyclone 9. Stitch directed the music video for Parasitic. They toured together pretty extensively, shared some members live, and several of the current/ex members were in the band Columbine from Columbus, Ohio. I did not know that. But once you start getting around, that area, you start seeing some sort of connection to Mushroom Head. They're in your subconscious.
You mean like Evil in Darkness?
Like Evil in Darkness, That's what I'm saying.
Sometimes you gotta have a bad day. So Dan, tell me about Machine Head.
Oh, sorry, I was playing air guitar. Machine Head is an American heavy metal band from Oakland, California. Sounds like I'm reading off the back of a box. Like, Machine Head is the premier American heavy metal band from Oakland, California. But in a lot of ways they are. They started in 1991 by Robb Flynn, obviously, who plays the guitar real good and does the vocals real good. And they basically came out of the ashes, or at least Rob did, of a band called Violence, which was a thrash band, I believe, which makes a whole lot of sense considering, 1991, Bay Area. Yeah, it's going to be a thrash band. Like, it's just going to be. But Machine Head, while having a little bit of thrash elements to their sound over the years, really had more of a deep-rooted beginning in groove metal, which, as you guys all know, is not always my favorite style of music because it reminds me of another band, called Pantera, who I'm not the biggest fan of. But I think what it really boils down to is I'm not the biggest fan of groove overall, but there are some bands that stand out. And when we start looking at the early Machine Head albums, I'll tell you what I liked about them.
My biggest joy this week was hearing the classic thrash tricks that come with all of your favorite bands. You've got two guitarists, you've got a vocalist who can stay in the pocket, can be melodic when needed, but is being aggressively melodic at times. Then you hear these very simple, very dry uses of guitar effects, and the mixes just fall into place. You could mix this down and put it on a cassette and it would fit right in most of the time. For me, that's something you only hear when a band like Metallica decides to throw back and play thrash again. But Machine Head's been doing it the whole time. So take the modern sensibilities of production and throw them out the window. This is heavy music being played by a heavy band.
Not heavy as in the caloric intake necessarily. They're slimmer than I am by a milestone, probably like two of them. But they're really heavy in a way that I think has somewhat been lost. They don't go for the bass drop crunk like everybody else does. nowadays. They're kind of like, you could almost call them a throwback band, but I would just say a band that understands what their vision is, which is to be heavy, to play genuinely heavy riffs, have fast, intense, sort of driving, groovy, I don't want to say sections, but just groovy passages and keeping the atmosphere heavy at all times. It's not the most dynamic music in the world, but it gets the job done, especially on these early records.
1994. Burn my eyes is what I say to the sun every time I go outside.
Yeah, I mean, it does try to burn your eyes. Machine Head tries to burn our eyes here. I have to admit, for the year this came out, this was much heavier than I was expecting it to be. Stylistically, it's very on par with what I would expect, but I was actually kind of blown away just at the savagery of the drums, that nice constant double kick. Robb Flynn's barking all the vocals, but like Joe said, he can be melodically aggressive when he wants to. I don't believe there's any power ballads here. There's no, Robb Flynn can sing relatively well, but it's more of kind of that deeper groove metal Phil Anselmo sort of sound. I'm not 100% sure that Robb Flynn has found his voice yet on this record, but I mean, he absolutely does what he needs to do. I just like the sheer machine-like precision that you find on this album. But as Joe said earlier, it still sounds very human, because everybody's going to say, well, Dan, Fear Factory's Soul of a New Machine sounded very, very mechanical, in comparison. And yeah, there's a reason for that. They love robots. But with Machine Head, I don't know. I really like it. It sounds like what it's called, like what it is on the tin. It sounds like a machine. I don't know. I don't know what else to say. It's heavy. It's in your face. It's not my favorite by Machine Head. I think their next one actually tops it in a lot of ways. But I was very surprised at the mix of kind of thrash and groove metal and keeping it up tempo. I think a lot of groove bands tend to slow it down to the point where it almost becomes sludgy. And this is just clean, in your face, moderately hard to play music. I don't want to say technical, because now that actually means something else. But it's very proficient music. It's a very, very solid release. And I can understand why everybody thought Machine Head was like the coolest band ever when this came out. Although ironically, the band didn't really do that well in the US at this time. They kind of had more fans in Europe than they had in the US, which is kind of strange to me.
This is an album driven by musicians that clearly love Cowboys from Hell and Vulgar Display of Power. That is fine. If you're going to set a blueprint for what your song structure is going to be, there's few bands you could do better than Pantera in 1994 from a heavy metal perspective. When a band like Metallica is trying to transition and be alternative, as good as that may have been, here's a band that can play guitar and is not afraid to play guitar and is not afraid to thrash and be aggressive. It's not Pantera light, it just has some cosmetic similarities. That might be the producer more than the band. But what I'm listening to is heavy music played by people. And it's making me want to start a circle pit in the office. It doesn't let up. I agree with Dan, it's not the best, but it is the first. And it's one of those starting points that you just have to acknowledge, because it could get better. It did get better. 1997. The more things change,
the heavier they get, I think is how you finish that. This record is the next one this record is the last one on steroids. It's heavier, it's sludgier, it's crunchier. Robb Flynn is more aggressive as a vocalist. It's more of a perfection on their original sound than it necessarily is an evolution in sound, but don't worry, we'll get there sooner than you think. But I really like this one. I think he sounds a little bit more like Anselmo on this one, though, which is what I meant by sounding like a more aggressive vocalist. But he will complement it by adding in some, they're not really clean vocals. I'm trying to remember exactly how Robb Flynn described his own voice. I think he just said it was like melodic screaming or something like that. Flynn refers to it as barking in key, which is, basically what he does. He never has really those smooth, clean breaks like you'd get out of a Slipknot or a Demon Hunter or anything like that. Like, he always keeps it kind of like there's just like a layer of crap all over everything, It's always going to sound dirty. It's going to be like that lived in Star Wars Cantina vocally, if that makes sense. Like it's dirty. Somebody should sweep the floor, but like don't. We like the way that sounds. But yeah, I think this one was harder. It was more driving. It was more in your face. I do have to ask you a question, Joe. It's been bothering me. How different is a 10-ton hammer from a primal concrete sledge?
The theory is in the physical dimensions of the hammer, not so much the density of the material. The real question is, can they get the job done in one swing? And how in the world is that tiny woman swinging that giant hammer?
I mean, it's a really good question. I like how you answered my question with a question. We're gonna move on though. I love this album, and one thing that I think is kind of cool too is that Robb Flynn is a very outspoken vocalist, and that his lyrics are less about being evil like a lot of his friends' bands were. I mean, there's a lot of like "I'm pissed off" type of songs. There's a lot of that on the Burning Red. But this one, I don't know. I like that Robb Flynn kind of talks about world events and stuff, whether you agree with him or disagree with him. It's interesting to me that he has something to say. I think eventually it gets to the point later on in their career where it gets a little tiring. But here, I think it's still fresh. It's also funny, even on the last record, I forgot to mention how, a song starts off and it's like, in 1994, corruption is da-da-da-da-da. And I was like, wow, don't ever say the name of the year. Don't ever say what year it is in the song. It's gonna always age the song. I mean, come on, Robb Flynn. It's not like in 2021 that corruption's not a thing that exists in our world. You didn't have to lock it into 1994. That's not even a criticism. That's a horrible attempt at being funny on my part. But I think you understand. Just don't say it. Don't say the year. Just roll with it. But yeah, I think this record, the more things change, is heavier. It's more solid. And I can completely understand with a record like this why everybody hated the next one so much.
To me, this album is a perfect example of what groove metal used to be. There's a difference between the band playing heavy music and what Dimebag Darrell was able to do with the guitar. So while that may have been groove metal, this is what I think groove metal is. It's this strange midpoint between thrash metal, dissonant, hardcore, and then heavy metal. So call it heavy metal because that's basically what it is. And it's 1997. Music was changing. Popular genres were changing. And here is Machine Head still doing the heavy metal thing. I think there is some aggression here that was not present in 100% of your favorite bands. So Machine Head would not let you down if you're a fan of the previous record. I've heard these two albums referred to as Pantera Light. That's not what they are. Just because you can mix a kick drum and make it sound tinny does not mean that you're trying to be Vinnie Paul. It's somebody trying to cash in on what was popular and trying to pull as much out of it. It's just a decision that someone made at the time with a production schedule and a producer who had made how many albums that week and mixed how many records that week. And we really like this sound. We want to try to recreate that, but we want to make it our own. Machine Head is just fucking heavy. It's 97. It's fucking heavy music.
Can I go into a segment that we have only visited once so far on this show? The Dan reads a totally messed up review of this album.
And 3
found on the internet.
2, 1.
So I can only assume that this music reviewer thinks that they're being funny. But this was found on nme.com. Don't worry, you won't accidentally stumble upon this review because I had to go back to the Wayback Machine to find it. But this guy named Mark Beaumont, I'm going to read you what he thinks of this record. Welcome to the dark side of New Grave. Please leave your tunes at the door. I think it's supposed to be the dark side of a new grave, dude, because you forgot the A. You really should have double checked that. Please leave your tunes at the door and don't feed the zombies. Yup. While the pop world grabs its big coat and heads for the windswept hills, it seems the hardcore scene has stopped all that cheerful church burning business. But put aside Metallica's wuss music. I'm thinking that was what, Load? 1997? That was Load, right?
I'm going to let it go for now because Load is an entertaining record.
Hey, this is not my words. This is Mark Beaumont. They put aside Metallica's wuss music and chosen instead to feel Robb Flynn's pain. Thus, the second album from Oakland's Machine Head will rocket to the top 20, despite being the sound of a warthog swearing loudly for 40 minutes. I mean, I don't see how that's a bad thing. And Robb's fractured soul giving him grief, something rotten this time around. He has known the depths of agony that only a very hairy man with a tonsil infection can truly know. I am the thing that makes you sick, he gurgles astutely on 10-ton hammer. You'll never understand my rage, he howls incoherently on Take My Scars. Happy bunny time it is not. Not that you can understand a single satanic word, he grunts. Since Logan Mater's guitars manage a fair impression of a herd of steamrollers mating throughout. It would take cast iron ears to tell the difference between, say, the front lines, Warthog breaks cover, Spine, Warthog's crushed under rampant steamroller, and Violate, swoony lemon head style ballad. Oh no, sorry. Warthog dies in a pool of its own vomit. The More Things Change may quite possibly be the heaviest album in the world, and thus appealing to the hordes of musical I can't even finish this. Like the editing is so bad. I guess what I'm trying to say is he didn't like it because it was too heavy, which completely blows my mind. Like when somebody's like, hey, you want to listen to the new Machine Head record? And it's 1997. And you're like, well, I don't really like metal at all, but I guess I'll listen to it. I mean, that's how you get a 1 out of 10, sort of rating like this. This just blew my mind because as I was reading it, I was like, even in 1997, it just seems like I couldn't believe that they still make people like this.
When you say the words Machine Head, you're not talking about a side mission of Cyberpunk. You're talking about a heavy fucking band. And even if you've never heard it before, you want to hear it now. Something about those two words put together in 1997, where do we start the pit? I don't even care anymore. The band is called Machine Head. Elbows are out. Let's fucking go.
Mind blown.
1999, The Burning Red.
Well, I think first of all, you need to go get that checked out. If it's red and it's burning, it may be something you got yourself, or it could be something that you got from someone else. So maybe you need to take inventory of everybody that you've been close with.
What if it is a 3-leaved plant that is climbing the tree in the backyard?
I think it'll be all right then. I wouldn't worry about it. The Burning Red is I believe it is the record that launched them into the level of popularity that they have now. But I think this is a hard birthing process for the fans. Because if you're a Pantera fan, you're a thrash fan, you're, all the horrible things that were described in that review I just read. If you're one of those guys, you're going to have a lot of trouble with this record because you're going to be all like, wait a minute, these guys are trying to do what's popular now. Because I don't know about you, but I like to eat. But I don't think that this is the sellout record that everybody says it is. Like, is it new metal? Robb Flynn will tell you, no, it is not new metal. He's wrong. This is definitely a new metal record. Right down to the tuning of the guitars, right down to the semi-screamed, semi-rapped vocals. Although, to quote Andrew Schwab, it's not really rapping. It's more like just yelling in time. It's not really, there's no rhyming or stanzas being written or anything of that nature. Honestly, for the year this came out in 1999, this sounds to me the way new metal bands are going to sound for the next 2 to 3 years. Just in your face, down-tuned, driving, more simplified riffs. You don't have like the level of solos that you had on previous Machine Head records. And Robb Flynn sounds a little bit more like Corey Taylor and less like Phil Anselmo on this record. And I'm here for it because he sounds more angry this way. He sounds more edgy. I think that when you play in a groove metal band, you sound like a 40-year-old dude. When you play in a new metal band, you sound like a 22-year-old. So it almost sounds like he's gone back in time as far as his level of angst.
What else could you want in an album that comes out in 1999? Sludgy guitar parts that randomly go into these clean, funky things, and then just as quickly go into chorus-driven onslaughts. I think this might be a perfect new metal record by a band that is clearly not new metal. I'm getting a My Ticket Home vibe listening to this one. Like they had this in them and they did it, and it's great. And like you said, it's not new metal. Well, it came out in 1999, and it very much resembles a style that people would refer to as nu metal. And I'm sure you got more attention from the general music fan when you showed up to play the show. But it still fits with what the band has on tape. If you go to see Machine Head and they play anything from the first 3 records. The only thing that really doesn't fit is the staccato rapping vocals. But when he's not doing that thing, it works for all the same reasons that Corey Taylor might be the greatest living male rock lead singer.
It goes without saying, and I'm not going to read the review because I already did, but let's just say the same website criticized the band for being what they were, which was their first 2 records. Like, criticized them for being a groove metal band and all this crap. But then the Burning Red comes out and they turn around and say, well, that's not okay either. You guys are just aping the style of what's popular now, and you guys are laying down some lame white boy raps, and you guys shouldn't have even tried. And his band's Lumbering Gristle is no match for the chilling metal / hip hop synthesis cooked up by bands like Korn or Limp Bizkit. The genre splice is as clumsy as it is unconvincing. It makes me wonder, like, what record were they listening to? Because I actually think that this record is good overall. Do I think that it's the most original thing that Machine Head could have put out? No, I don't. I don't think that we've gotten there yet. But I think that, like, as a heavy album, I can understand why groove metal fans wouldn't like it. But what I don't understand is how people find it as repulsively unlistenable as they do. I found it to be very entertaining overall and was actually a pretty pleasant experience because the songs were a little bit more catchy. They were a little bit more memorable than what we'd had previous. I mean, like, straight metal is great, but it's not always a memorable genre. And so here's the band trying to do something different. And yeah, it may not necessarily be the most original thing in the world, but I think that they pulled it off really well. Just my opinion.
That's something worth mentioning because it's been true the whole time. When you listen to the guitars being played, they're not played with robotic precision, but they are played very well. And that is something that will follow through the entire discography. I've said it a few times and I'm going to say it once more. This sounds like heavy music played by actual people, not music that was produced to the grid and made as robotic as possible. For something that is called Machine Head, it is not robotic in its presentation.
Well, and I like what Robb Flynn himself said in reference to this album. He goes, there's 1.5 minutes of rapping on this album. The other 53 minutes of the record are like a giant scar being ripped open while I projectile vomit through it. If all people got out of the Burning Red was rap metal, then they didn't listen to it.
Are you ready for Supercharger?
I am. Let's do this.
2001.
Well, I'm really, really, really sorry if you hated the Burning Red. This record is arguably more nu metal than the last one. However, I don't think that's a bad thing because they had made an attempt to actually go in and add a little bit more of that, like, traditional metal or some of that groove metal sound back into it. But overall, we get the same level of aggression that we got on the Burning Red.
In 2001, when your band is being discussed by diehard fans who can't believe you went nu metal and general heavy music fans who don't give a shit that you went kind of nu metal for 1 minute and 37 seconds, or whatever the time was that Robb Flynn said, when you give me a heavy, dry enough record that is groovy, but also has some precise thrash-like staccato guitar playing in the first 5 minutes, what you're telling me is I'm about to listen to a heavy metal record. And in 2001, that wasn't the most common thing. But like Dan said, where they do try to sneak in that groove and that thrash-like precision, there's even more nu metal, but it's fine. It's Machine Head. This is what they're giving me up to this point. They're giving heavy music that sounds like human beings got together, and what you have now is the newest album. This one works very well for me.
Well, yeah, I think that, it's more nu metal in a lot of ways. But I do think that, from a meathead perspective, it is pound for pound heavier than the Burning Red. It's a darker record than the Burning Red. It's certainly more angry than the Burning Red, probably because everybody made fun of the Burning Red. But I think the biggest travesty of this album is I think this could have been a really good selling nu metal album if it hadn't come out on October 2nd, 2001. And that the lead single hadn't been a song called Crashing Around You, which featured Robb Flynn in a city with buildings falling all around him. Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is it didn't go over very well here in the United States. And that kind of just absolutely took away any momentum that this record could have had. It was stopped dead in the water.
To be fair, there were a lot of records that were stopped dead in the water that year. A lot of good records.
Like what, Joe? Oh yeah, there was that Power Man 5000. But as we discovered, he's the one. Spider One is the one who decided not to release that record, and his reason was it sounds too much like the last one. Man,
I'm so glad I have a digital version of that.
I think Supercharger is a record that, again, mostly got ignored, but I actually kind of like this super aggressive, almost hardcore approach to nu metal. There's another band that we like to talk about on the show every now and again called Travail, and it's very similar. It's very similar in that like halfway point between being hardcore, but also being very nu metal in its approach.
Seriously, what does all of this mean?
Yeah, I get a lot of that. I get a lot of Travail vibes off of this thing, even though I know obviously most people are going to associate this sound with Machine Head, as they should. But you can go listen to my Travail interview on Discuss Metal. Or it's not to ever remember that band. Anyway, what does that say? That says that a lot of these guys out there playing hardcore metalcore now, yeah, they grew up listening to nu metal, and that's okay. We like nu metal on the show. We're official nu metal supporters. To me, just because a band plays nu metal doesn't mean I should discount it entirely. I like listening to songs and then deciding if those songs are enjoyable to me or not. And if I'm going to throw a genre over it at the end of it, I can do that for categorization purposes. But I don't have like an instant turn off button. And so I think going into this record with that spirit, again, I think this is a very dark, heavy, enjoyable Machine Head record that doesn't share a lot of similarities with their origins. But, you can't play groove metal, after 1999, you really can't, and not get away with it. You do whatever you want, but as far as selling records goes,
2003, Through the Ashes of Empires.
Now, isn't this one interesting?
This is the album where I officially got on the train. I had seen Machine Head, just hadn't spent a lot of time with the band. But here we are in 2003, and I'm shopping for whatever CDs came out on New Release Tuesday. Through the Ashes of Empires, $7. I'll give it a shot. I was not disappointed. I didn't know what I was expecting, but what I got was a heavy metal band, not a nu metal band. And I would not have been surprised to hear a nu metal band, but I heard all of those 80s thrash metal tricks brought forward and given some better production, and I've been a fan ever since. When I sit down and play guitar with a limited effects pedal board and I use those effects to create soundscapes, I'm not trying to be Brian Patton's favorite shoegaze band. I'm trying to create a challenging thrash metal sound, even though I'm not playing thrash metal. That's something that was very common at the time. It was something that was extremely common because of everything Head and Monkey did and what Wes Borland did. And here's Machine Head, who's just playing heavy fucking music. What else could you possibly want? It doesn't really sound like we listen to Pantera anymore, but Robb Flynn just sounds like Robb Flynn now.
I think that there were definitely some building blocks up to this because they dropped the nu metal almost completely on this record. They did not survive the 9/11 nu metal purge, as we've come to refer to it as. This is just a very straight ahead. It has groove metal, I think, is its base, but has the pace of thrash. Does a lot of those thrash tricks. It's just a heavy, in-your-face, technically proficient ball buster of a record. And I would say that this is the first record where the Machine Head as we know them today, the Machine Head that you expect whenever you hear the band name, this is the sound that you're expecting. And I think they pulled off really well. Robb Flynn, like you said, Joe, sounds like Robb Flynn now. He doesn't, I'm not comparing him to Corey Taylor. I'm not comparing him to Phil Anselmo. He has his own delivery, and I like his mixture of clean and heavy vocals more than I like most people's, in the sense that he can seamlessly move between the two, and it's never a gimmick, it's never a trick. And I like the way he's able to just pull a melody out of something that's otherwise not really that melodic. Barking in key indeed. But yeah, this record absolutely dominates for me. It's heavy, it is in your face. I think the production is absolutely like chef's kiss. And I believe this was actually self-produced by Robb Flynn. So, he definitely made those guitars sound real good.
This is the closest you're going to get to a classic sounding Machine Head record.
Hey, Joe, did you hear the little hint, a little bit of Gothenburg influence that has crept its way in to the Machine Head sound? I mean, I'm here for it because they're not just rewriting At the Gate songs, but there's a little bit of that, about that Gothenburg magic in there. Just like a just like a little, just, you know, what do they call that? A smackerel of Gothenburg.
I was going to suggest that the band picked up some metalcore influences because we play
Same
the
thing.
breakdowns real slow, and then we play the not breakdown real fast, and then we start barking over the chorus, and everything's fine.
I wouldn't say metalcore necessarily, but I could see how you would think that because, you know, Rob screams, he does play breakdowns, but he plays metal breakdowns, not hardcore breakdowns. Let me go get out my breakdown ruler. I'll come back. I'll tell you what kind of breakdown it is. But in all seriousness, you saw a lot of that. You know, they credit Machine Head as being one of the pioneering bands in the new wave of American heavy metal, which was all just like metalcore bands. But Machine Head really wasn't here. But this is a very interesting, like, metalcore adjacent album that if you were a fan of metalcore and you picked this up, you'd be like, wow, this is actually really good. And let's hope that you would be like, I'm going to check out more bands that play like this kind of thrashy type of stuff. Because for whatever reason, they're taking what most people would consider to be dated sounds and making them sound very modern. It's not quite the Doom 2016 of music, but it is very interesting how heavy some of these older styles actually are whenever you give them modern production.
And it sounds like the band you're going to go see when they play live, not an overly produced studio version of what we think would sound good if we had 27 more members.
Not a big fan of Archspire, are you, Joe?
2006, The Blackening.
So this is the one where they go straight black metal. No, I'm kidding. They don't, but
Blackened
they
is
should.
the end.
They should, though. They should have gone black metal on this one. It would have been amazing. You hear Robb Flynn just go, you know, the whole time. Like, it'd be awesome. This record's just gnarly, man. And again, it's a lot like their last record. It's just that it sounds better. This one's has a little bit of metalcore in it. I'll give it that. It's heavier. It's more intense. It's more in your face than necessarily what we're used to with Machine Head. They are hitting their peak of heaviness in these years. And Rob complements it again with his clean vocal delivery, which sounds really good to hear. It's just interesting to me, again, how adjacent this is to metalcore while still upholding the traditions of heavy metal and being a legitimate metal release in a sea of bands that just copied riffs from overseas bands and hope you didn't notice.
You're talking about how heavy the record is during the first 2 minutes of the album, where it is the most thrash it could possibly be. We're going to lead in with a very slow-paced acoustic guitar riff. We're going to fade the drums in, and here come the distorted guitars, and now we're going to be epic and just explode the riffs all over you. That's not what happens.
Oh, God, I feel like I needed a napkin after that comment.
I don't know if I can leave that in the show. We'll find out.
You're the one that said explodes all over. Anyway, those were your words, not mine. This is how we get that E for explicit rating.
It's 2007. Did you want a heavy record that wasn't metalcore? Don't say yes, because I know you didn't. But here was Machine Head still doing what Machine Head is known for. They're playing extremely heavy and groovy metal songs. Robb Flynn is barking his fucking throat out. I can't say anything else. What else did you want in 2007?
I mean, didn't Zayo's The Fear Is What Keeps Us Here come out like the year before that?
Yeah, I wanted this.
That's fine. I did. I'm happy to have both. But one thing, you know, speaking of that, the production on these last two records have been phenomenal. It sounds as good as this kind of music can sound before you start having to add artificial means of heaviness into it. You know, the riffs crunch as hard as they can crunch. The vocals are screamed as hard as they can be screamed. But one thing that Machine Head has going for them that a lot of bands of their ilk don't is melody. Robb Flynn can write a chorus, and it works. And he gets better and better at it on each release. And that's something that is hard for metal bands, I think, sometimes to get to, is a point of being able to write songs that will appeal to more than just people that are here to punch you in the pit. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with bands that do that. I love bands that only do that. Love you, Napalm Death. Never change.
There are aspects of this band that you can point and say that's where they went kind of nu metal. But realistically, when you look at the albums as a whole, we're seeing the same toolbox used in a different order to a different degree throughout the discography. I know we're 3 albums from the end, but I feel like Machine Head is a sure thing at this point.
I would agree with you until we get to 2018, but we're not there yet. So, let's talk about some bugs here.
2011, Unto the Locust.
Do you know what Machine Head needed?
Epic melodic vocals.
They wanted to go. I almost feel like they wanted to throw some power metal into the mix here, because you're getting that clean melodic sort of power metal sound. I mean, when you listen to the intro, which is like Sonata in C, I mean, I Am Hell, whatever. You start off with this super, super power metal intro.
I feel like Robb Flynn has Ghost at this point.
It's entirely possible. I'm fine with it. But these are some epic songs. I mean, because when I first was looking at this, I had not heard this before we did the episode. And so, I'm doing the thing that I do, being all grumbly and being like, this album only has 7 songs on it. There's somebody better not be trying to sneak one of those EPs past me. And then I actually looked at the track length and I was like, oh, okay. So Machine Head's going to go epic on this record, which is great. I'm so happy they didn't go prog. Super slow. I'm kidding. It's not slow. It gets pretty breakneck. The intro takes forever though. These are like extended riff ideas. I don't necessarily think this is the strongest Machine Head album from a songwriting perspective, because I feel like to hit these track lengths, there's a lot of repetition employed, which bugs me on a very minor level. But then again, if I'm at work and I'm into it, I don't care if the song's 8 minutes long, because I'm just grooving with it. But you get this almost power metal sort of sound coming out of this band that we haven't heard before. And you've got the Robb Flynn choir going on through a lot of the vocals, which I think is a really different sound for them.
You mentioned Zao earlier, and it's topical on this album because many of the vocal passages have that several layers of hardcore vocals that I did not expect to hear on a Machine Head album. Nothing in this discography led me to believe I was going to get an overly produced hardcore vocal out of Robb Flynn. And I hate to say it, it really fucking worked. But he doesn't stay there very long. He gets right back into I Am Robb Flynn throughout the record. The songs are just too long for me. I think you're right. These are extended riff ideas that were turned into a more epic sounding album. Or these are your par for the core Machine Head songs that we tried to make more epic by putting some drawn out intros and outros on them. Can't blame the guy for trying, but if you click delete the first 2 minutes, what you have is a solid first half of the next Machine Head album. So it's good. It's just a little more drawn out than the previous albums would have been.
Yeah, it's not necessarily the strongest material from a songwriting perspective, but I do think that the ideas are good. I like listening to the songs, but they do tend to overstay their welcome a bit when you're kind of used to Machine Head kind of getting in and getting out, and here, yeah, they're throwing a lot at the wall in these songs, and they're trying to morph their sound into something new or something more original. But at the end of the day, you've still just got your base of thrash metal and groove metal here, and you can add other elements to it. But one thing that I've noticed too is that there's a lot of dropout where they'll be doing their Machine Head thing and then stop and then play a melodic part and then start being Machine Head again. There's a lot of that, and that just goes to show that maybe some of the elements that you're trying to mix don't mix as well as you think that they do. And again, this is not like a slam on this record, because I would listen to this over a lot of other bands that are in the same genre. I'm going to listen to this over Demon Hunter or something like that. But I think overall they did a good job. I just think it could have been better.
Is it time for Bloodstone and Diamonds?
Oh, I thought you would never ask.
2014.
So this is where they kind of figure it out.
After 20 years, they finally figured it out?
No, that's not what I mean. I'm talking more specifically about the last album, how it had, very few tracks and they were very long. This seems almost more like the more completed idea. This album is equally as epic as the Locust album, as I'll call it. I think that Robb Flynn sounds really, really, really good on this record with mixing again The shouting, the singing, the screaming, the guttural, all of that sounds great. And the riffs are just epic. They're in your face, but they're not so in your face that they're like weird prog riffs that you have to like listen to 4 or 5 times. This just beats you over the head in a very epic, almost power metal sort of way. Now, let's make a distinction. I am not saying that this record is power metal. I'm only saying that the epic nature of it reminds me of power metal. And I think that the idea they had on this on the last album is more completed here on Bloodstone and Diamonds.
I want to go into a 3-minute diatribe about how this record takes all of the previous albums and turns it into this new idea of what Machine Head is going to be. I want to be angry at this album because we're so close to the end of the discography. It's been 20 years. We're going to just keep doing the same damn thing. No, we're not. We're going to create something new, guys. I can't do that. I can't tell you that Machine Head threw out all the good ideas. They just took what they know and what they've been doing for 20 years, added a few tasteful melodic choices, and now you have a new, heavier sounding Machine Head that is pushing heavy metal forward. They're not trying to reinvent the wheel. They're not even trying to buy a new car. They're just trying to get everybody to the end and make it as entertaining as possible. And I think the lesson was learned on the previous album. It's not about the song being long. It's about expanding what you have and adding effective melodic elements to it. Machine Head just nailed it on this one.
I think this is their best record as far as an accumulation of different styles and them perfecting on their own ideas. I found this one to be the most enjoyable to listen to during my ridiculous listen through of every Machine Head album. This is the one that I was like, okay, this is the one that's going in the playlist. This is the one that I'm going to come back to the most often. It doesn't mean everything before it sucks. It just means that this is the one that stood out to me the most and one that I really am interested in digging into a little bit harder. And I think it's really interesting it coming this late in their career where you've basically mastered every aspect of what you do and you've perfected it. Which is why, as we move on in their discography, I have a lot of questions.
You really want to talk about Catharsis in 2018, don't you?
I really do, and it sounds like I'm getting ready to take just a giant steaming pile, like right on it, but I'm really not. I have legitimate, innocent questions about it.
2018.
So Catharsis is like a midlife crisis on tape. I don't know how else to really describe it. This is not a slam on Robb Flynn. It's just that like he went a lot of different directions on this one that don't make sense. Because like, I mean, you start off with the very first song, Volatile, and it's very like, it starts off like the first few seconds, you're like, okay, we're going to be back in groove metal, thrash metal, you know, like I'll just read you the genre tags on this record. It's new metal, groove metal, alternative metal, and rap metal. So like we've gone back quite a few years back to the kind of Supercharger, Burning Red sort of sound. But even then, I feel like the songs that were on those records are better than the songs that are on this record. And I don't mean any disrespect here. There's nothing wrong with wanting to throw back to an old style that you used to play. Like, I appreciate the new metal trappings of Volatile. I like how angry Robb Flynn sounds. I like how noisy the track is overall. But you then immediately like go into the song Catharsis, and it's like the first 2 minutes. Because you got to think, the first song's kind of a banger. It gets you going. And then the second song is like, it's a 6-minute track that does eventually get heavy, but it's just 2 minutes of just like noise and Robb Flynn singing softly to you. And it's like really like introspective and pretty sounding. And it's just weird to me. Like the sequencing, it just seems really, really weird. This song's also 1 million years long. Did I explain that? It's 1 hour and 15 minutes long. Which, you know, when you've been listening to this many albums by a band, you know, I went through this discography 2 times for this episode. And, you know, get into that last album and feeling like, okay, I'm done. I'm going to go listen to my favorite shoegaze band after this. Then it's like, no, you're going to listen to this 1 hour and 15 minute album now is what you're going to do. I'd say nu metal is probably the most prevalent style here. But then you've got songs like Beyond the Pale, where I feel like, I don't know if he's like talking about like a bad lifestyle that he used to live or what, I get the impression that Robb Flynn grew up in California in like the hood and had like a really rough background. I don't know if he did or he didn't, but that's what he's singing about. So I'm going to just assume that he did. It just seems like he's remembering a lot of stuff that happened like 20 years ago.
When I'm listening to this album, thinking about the last 8 albums we've listened to, I have to wonder if Robb Flynn is a talented guitarist and a band leader who is actually playing a different genre than what is actually coming out of these albums. Is he sitting down to write, let's just say shoegaze for a second, but he's not physically capable of it? So what you're getting is a very atmospheric album with extremely fast guitar playing, extremely fast technical guitar playing. And nobody's questioning it because it just sounds like Machine Head now. 25 years ago, we were fans of Pantera. We decided just to play that style of groove metal. Zakk Wylde does a similar thing. He's not playing the genre that you're hearing, but he doesn't know that. And this is the record where I really question if Robb Flynn is focusing on a specific sound. Is he sitting down doing a Lars Ulrich thing where he says, this record's going to sound like this, guys, and we have to write it this way? Or is he just using the tools that he has, and what we end up hearing might resemble heavy metal, might resemble melodic metal, might sound like nu metal at times, but to him it's just the next thing he wrote? Is it all the same to him and the other members of the band? I don't know the answer.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say this was Robb Flynn, the album. And I think that 9 albums in, who's going to question the band leader guy? When he's like, no, it has to be this. And again, I'm not saying any of that happened, but it feels like it did. Whenever you have a record that lacks cohesion in the very specific way that this record lacks cohesion, you just because I like to pay attention to lyrics, and Robb Flynn is a guy that I don't know, what I'm trying to dig out of this is that lyrically it bothers me how he just flips from the past and the future all willy-nilly, where 1 minute he's talking about how hard it was to grow up in the hood and all this stuff, and then you have a song like California Bleeding, which is almost sounds like a Kid Rock song in places. It's weird. I guess what I'm trying to say is that the lyrics are so quote unquote raw and real that they would have sounded really relevant on a 90s release. But here, for lack of a better way of saying it, they just sound stupid in places. And I know that Robb Flynn can do better than this, but he just tried to do a big thing here, and it just wasn't. I don't think it resulted the way he thought that he did. And it led to Phil Demmel, their guitarist, say he hated the album. He told Toomey that, actually. If you guys, we'll link the interview with Joshua Toomey under here, because there's moments of what I wrote that I like. I wrote most of the music to California Bleeding, but then Flynn wrote the lyrics on top of it. And I just wish that me and Dave McLean, our drummer, would talk about it and say, man, I wish I could take my riffs back. No, that isn't what we wanted them used for. So I think in that sense, it became a Robb Flynn solo project, and it isn't what I signed up for. And I think that that's valid, and that is kind of what I hear here. I don't have anything against Robb Flynn. I think that everything he's done so far has been great. I think this is the first really big, kind of what were they thinking moment. Because in this record, with it being an hour and 15 minutes, there's 40 minutes of really good material here. And the rest of it is just whatever Robb Flynn could come up with, or whatever he decided to morph into a song. And so it's just weird. And his vocal delivery is weird and different. I don't know, Triple Beam and California Bleeding I have the biggest issues with, because they just seem really almost like Kid Rock songs. If I can say that, if I can invoke the name of Kid Rock on this podcast,
I'll allow it.
But it's just it's a little bit cringe, I guess, is all I can really say about it. It's got some banging riffs in places. There's places where I really bang my head and I have a good time, but I have to not pay attention to the lyrics, which you guys know is really hard for me. And I cringe a little bit when I'm listening to it. It's definitely one that I would actually choose to listen to for enjoyment on headphones instead of playing it out loud for other people to hear. And this is after I've already told you guys that Still Sucks by Limp Bizkit is an amazing record, because there's ways to do throwback in your sound, where you take all the good stuff and you play music the way we remember hearing it, not exactly the way that it actually was back then. I think that's the biggest distinction when you're doing a throwback is you can't, make it exactly the same because there's a lot of reasons why those styles of music died out and went out of favor over time. You've got to just play the best looking version of it. And I just feel like that wasn't accomplished here. And I just hope that this was just that weird album by Machine Head. And the next one will just go back to what Robb had been building on the last 3 albums or so.
I want to say it's weird, but I think the best way to describe this album is go see Machine Head live. It has that throwback heavy metal party vibe that no matter what you do on stage, the crowd is going to be into it. And I think that's the point when you're listening to Machine Head going forward. It's been like this for a while, but what it is, a band that plays whatever the hell they want, that expects the crowd to be into it. It's kind of like Rob Zombie in that way. You go see Rob Zombie live, he's going to play the hits, but he might play a random set of songs that no one has listened to in the past 20 years. But because he's decided that's what the band sounds like today, you're expected to be into it as a fan. And in a live setting, that works. So here's Machine Head bringing out that toolbox again. Well, let's write a record that sounds like what our live show sounds like. And at the end of the day, that sounds kind of random. I don't hate it. It's a heavy record by Machine Head. But if you really focus on what you're hearing, the problems are there. I don't think they're done, but there's a reason why Robb Flynn is the only remaining original member.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of a weird ending. Normally when we get to the end of a career, we're like, this is the absolute pinnacle of greatness, or the band went astray for a little while and then they came back with this one and we're all back on board again. And, this is just a really kind of strange discography where the most recent album is the one that's objectively the worst. And the one before that was objectively the best. Okay. My opinion was that it was the best, but I'm going to say it's objective because I don't know. I'm the guy on this podcast.
Final thoughts on Machine Head. Dan.
I mean, up until 2018, Machine Head was a sure thing. I mean, every time you listen to a Machine Head album, you knew you were going to get a heavy, in-your-face, heartfelt record played by human beings that had a lot of diversity to the sound and mixed elements that bands don't normally mix together. And they did it really well. And they did all of it without getting too up their own asses and without getting too prog and without doing all the things that bands do that annoy us. And as far as I'm concerned, they never really sold out or went pop. I mean, some people feel they did that with the Burning Red, but I don't know. I don't hear that. I just saw a band trying to do something different, or maybe trying to make a living as a band. I don't really hold that against them. I hate to see that later on in the discography, though, that really there wasn't the amount of care and quality control put into the project as there probably should have been. But like I said, I'm still a Machine Head fan overall. And if the next record is better, then I'm totally for it.
At the end of the day, I'm a fan of this band. Machine Head is one of those bands that pulls from all of your favorite heavy genres. And even when it sounds weird, it's entertaining. What is the best album? It doesn't matter. You're going to enjoy 100% of this discography. You just might not be on board with the hour and 15-minute onslaught with the most recent album. That is not a reason to stop listening to Machine Head. That's a reason to go see Machine Head live. You're going to hear technical, interesting, heavy metal, and even sneak some new metal in at times. The band has some hardcore in places. They have the groove. What more could you want? For me, Machine Head is an almost perfect heavy metal experience, and everyone should listen to this band. So check out Machine Head. Dan, what's your album of the week?
My album of the week, my first album of the week for 2021. I'm sorry, 2022. See, you see, the last 2 years have just been one giant long month for me. So I have to really jump in there and say that my album of the week for 2022 is the mixtape album, Clouds by NF. Been listening to a lot of metal, and we've got so many banging metal heavy bands for 2022 to talk about that I needed a little bit of a palate cleanser, so I listened to a little bit of that emotional hip hop that I enjoy so very, very much.
I'm stuck on this band, Dead. That's right, Dead, D-E-D, and their album School of Thought. It's basically nu metal. And when I thought it was a thing that Dan and Jeff needed to hear, I immediately got a response. Oh yeah, we know. It was hardcore. Then it wasn't hardcore. It's still good. And if you subscribe to Patreon for $1, you'll get to hear what we think about both of those albums. But this is the one you should listen to this week. Take us out, DFT.
If you guys like this podcast and you want to reach out to us and communicate with us, we love communicating with you. There's a lot of different ways you can do that. You can send us an email at danandjoeshow@gmail.com. You can follow us on Facebook or message us there at facebook.com/discography discussion. You can follow us on Instagram at discussmetal. You can follow us on Twitter at discussmetal. You can send an email to danandjoeshow@gmail.com. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can go about this. You can write us a letter. No, I'm kidding. You don't have to write us a snail mail letter, but you can join our Discord server where we are chatting 24/7 with fans of the show. I'm in there. Joe's in there. Jeff's in there. Even some of the co-hosts that pop up now and again are in there, as well as most of our Patreon subscribers. And speaking of Patreon, if you feel so compelled to support us financially, you can do that at patreon.com/discussmetal. And we'll have links in the show notes that'll take you to all of these wonderful places. And we sincerely hope to hear from you soon. Also, if you are in a band or you own a company or you want to sponsor us in any sort of way, send us an email, like I said, at danandjoeshow@gmail.com, and we will see what we can do to make that happen for you.
And on that note, this has been episode 254 of Discography Discussion. Thank you for listening. You can like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at discussmetal. Subscribe to our podcast everywhere you listen to podcasts, including Google Play, Apple Podcasts, and Stitcher. Visit discussmetal.com for all things discography discussion. And please send questions and comments to danandjoeshow@gmail.com. If you are not a patron, you can become one at patreon.com/discussmetal. We have some sweet perks.
I want to Scrooge McDuck into your money.
$1 a month gets you into that exclusive album review feed.